We are proud members of the Spy Podcast Network. Find out more at www.spypodcasts.com.
Hello and welcome to SpyHards podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur, and I should try to get a run-in.
That's like my outro line. You've stolen it already. Thanks for that, Cam.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Well, joining us in the League of Morons this week, we have a very, very special guest, Mr. Matt Glasby. He's a writer for Total Film and the Radio Times and the author of quite a few books, but namely Britpop cinema, from Train Spotting to This Is England, and the Book of Horror, The Anatomy of Fear in Film. Hello, Matt, and welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Quite the intro here. So we've set the table well. You've got a lot of credentials, so hopefully we live up to this.
Well, a very, very special guest. I'm honoured. So.
Yeah. Well, I suppose before we talk about the film, we need to get to know our guest a little bit. So, you've written for Total Film, Radio Times. Where did your interest in films spring from? Wow,
that's a toughie. I feel like it's just always been there, and I feel like also for people, I don't want to speak, but people of our generation, of a certain age, like in the 80s, film was the magic. It might be different now with streaming or whatever, but like VHS, all those things, all those great big blockbusters. So, show me an 80s nerd and I will show you a film lover. And yeah, this is what they look like 30 years later, 40 years later.
We all have podcasts now, that's basically it.
Yeah, that's it.
And maybe we'll get to your spy credentials in a little bit before we talk about the film. But you've before that, you've also got your books out, and I want to talk about that a little bit too, because they're also quite contrasting. There's one about Britpop cinema, which is a concept I only sort of sprung across when I found your book, but actually it makes complete sense as a genre, because that really was a time and place in British cinema.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. It's nice to have coined a phrase, even if you and I are the only people that use it. So Britpop cinema is about the sort of explosion of optimistic, upbeat British cinema in the 90s, and British film suddenly becoming a thing that wasn't just Ken Loach and Mike Leigh. It wasn't just kitchen sink. Actually, it was kind of cinematic and cool, that sort of Danny Boyle thing. I look back at those films. I lived through those films, and looking back at them, it struck me that we'd hit a real moment. And there was lots and lots and lots of books about Britpop music and how that changed. Britain in the 90s. No books about the films. So I decided that it would be my duty to change that, and thus Britpop cinema.
We too have a similar calling when it comes to spy films. But speaking of, I mean, I haven't gone through the list of films, but is there a spy film in the Britpop genre?
No, but the closest is going to be your Johnny Englishes.
Yes.
Those count. Those totally count as spy films, yeah.
Yeah.
They're spy films, and then from my point of view, they were sort of upbeat, optimistic seeming, cinematic as opposed to sort of drudgery TV-based British films that were competing on a world stage. They're not, I'll be honest, they're not my favourite films, but yeah, you could argue that they're certainly worth them, mentioned in the book. I don't do chapters on them.
Whoa.
Sorry to say.
I figured that would be like the essential skeleton of the book would be like the emergence of Johnny English.
Yeah. That's the subtitle, is Britpop Cinema, the emergence of Johnny English.
Sequel.
Yeah, you'll do a follow-up that's like the Britpop Cinema Strikes Again or something like that. Is that, yeah?
It was put to me that on a world stage, the Britpop cinema as a book concept was niche, but were I to write the Johnny English story, I fear that might be even a few steps further along.
Well, we have to write that story at some point, so we will be...
You guys are the experts.
Well, that's a credit I don't think I deserve. But then... I think, again, your other genre that you focused on, which is horror, which I think is a really Cam's thing here. I can't do horror films myself. I ran out of The Mummy.
Oh, wow.
I wish that was a joke. I genuinely ran out of The Mummy. When he came out of that sarcophagus, I was out of that cinema. I left my nan sitting there. She was very confused.
And you speak about the old Universal horror one from the 30s, right?
Of course.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I was just trying to work out what part of Brendan Fraser you didn't like, but
Well, no, he brought me back in. It's a lifelong love for Brendan Fraser. But
so Cam, you're a massive horror fan.
I really am I really enjoy horror. I watch a lot of it. I'm not someone who, if you ask me what my sort of specialties in terms of film knowledge are, I wouldn't say horror is at the top, but it's definitely a genre I tend to watch a lot of. And I think part of that is because a lot of them are 90 minutes. And I do like a good 90-minute movie.
Yeah.
Well, I was just curious with horror. I think every person who's into horror comes from a different angle. Some people are really into sort of, the supernatural elements. Some are into slasher films. What drew you into horror?
Well, what drew me into horror was, I think it was probably slasher films in the early days. But more than that, it's just there's a lot of there's a huge and even bigger increasing following for horror, and I feel that like horror fans love horror. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a way of life. It's not just I quite like rom-coms. So I just feel like I'm a lifer, and I think anyone that sort of it sounds like you are too, and yeah, we'll watch absolutely any old crap in in the service of a scare, and sometimes multiple times. There's a real obsessiveness about it. What inspired the book is that I love being scared, and I felt that most horror books, which I absolutely sort of hoover up, concentrate on the importance of the film, or great sort of landmarks in the genre, whereas actually the thing that I find myself talking about the most is whether something's scary or not. So what I wanted to do with the Book of Horror is just collate the scariest films ever. They didn't have to be good, they didn't have to be clever, they didn't have to make money, they didn't have to anything. They just had to be horror films that were available, like you guys are doing, and scary, and then to try and work out in what ways each one was scaring us.
And so what were some of the ones that you listed as being the scariest? Because scariest is so subjective.
It is so subjective. Well, this is why I had a system called Scare Tactics to try and work out how each one is working on us. And the book has 34 main chapters of, like, I guess, the scariest ever. And then for each one of those, there's 3 sort of follow-up films, which are kind of not necessarily less scary, just a bit more obscure. And the main chapters run from everything, you're going to have like The Exorcist and The Shining through there, right up to really recent stuff. Like there's an Argentine film called Terrified from a couple of years ago, which is absolutely shit scary, and Lake Mungo from Australia from 10 years ago or so, which is sort of a bit more on the obscure level. Horror fans will know these, but a little bit more obscure. The idea was that everything had an equal footing, because it's based on how scary it is, not how important it is.
What I always find fascinating about horror is that horror fans will watch, as you said, like just anything, including just like endless bad sequels, anything just to find that pure experience of those terrifying moments.
Yeah.
So it's such an interesting genre in that the majority of horror is pretty bad, I guess, but it's like those special gems are why people are so compelled to keep digging in, and they do emerge.
Definitely. And one of the things that's the book tracks is and as it say in the introduction, is that actually only horror and comedy, they're not genres on subject, they're genres on reaction. So a comedy is a comedy because it makes you laugh, a horror film is a horror film because it makes you scared, whereas your spy films are spy films because they contain certain story elements. Mm-hmm. And so actually that's the reason, one of the reasons that we go through all this crap, is to get that little sort of, it's not, if I don't know if it's a dopamine hit, but to get that little hit of being scared. And actually there's loads of bad films in the book that have a few really scary moments, so they've earned their place, just as a bad comedy might have a really brilliant sequence in it.
When I hear the word tradecraft mentioned in the film, I just get like a little shiver down my spine. It's perfect. Well, I suppose we'll come back to the book in a bit, but I did want to ask one more question about the films that you've discovered on your journey in putting this book together. Is there a film that you came across that you weren't too familiar with before, but then when you really had to go back and dig into the film, that you gained a new appreciation with?
Yeah, there were lots. So like I say, there's some, obvious ones that you go back over. And a horror fan is I was researching this book my whole life, for fun and just seeking out those dark corners. But then it got really serious. So I had sort of 6-8 months of watching 5 or 6 horror movies a day, which, newsflash, is really, really terrible for you. But then, some of the stuff I found some things I couldn't, that were sort of on YouTube that I couldn't establish if they were films or TV or just someone's, personal rantings. I found like Icelandic films and Venezuelan films that, clearly haven't got that good a release anywhere. And those things, it was a real turning up gems, because you're wading through this stuff. As we say, some of it's bad, and then you hit upon something amazing like, I've never heard of this before. And not just I've never heard of this while researching, I've never heard of this in the 40 years beforehand when I just wanted to watch these films. So hopefully there's some really, really deep dive stuff on there. Loads of horror fans will be like, scene, but what are you going to do?
Hey, there's always surprises out there. We found some crackers in our searches, and we're not even in the first 100 yet. So, count me a Condor Man fan.
Condor Man. And also, like, I just think of with horror, even something that could be mainstream released, like, will be ignored, and you go like, hey, there's a sequence in this that's unbelievable. I always think of The Strangers, Pray at Night, a movie I saw in theaters. That sequence in the pool is just unbelievable filmmaking. And, I think it got a sea of 1- and 2-star reviews and was just kind of, disappeared from theaters. But moments like that are why the genre can be so exciting.
Definitely. That film's good. The guy that made it, British director, his British films are really good as well. He's really talented. Johannes Roberts. And he made a film called F about hoodies attacking a school. It was just a brilliant British slasher, of which there were very, very few. There's loads out there. Keep looking. And I keep on coming across things that I think, I didn't even hear of this when I was researching. Oh my God, if there's a sequel, that's going in.
Well, I think we need to check your spy credentials before we get to the film in question. We've discussed Britpop, we've discussed horror, but spy films. What are you into?
What am I into? I was thinking about this earlier because I knew you were going to ask, and I worry that I am a poor candidate for this podcast. I grew up, I don't know what age you guys are, but I grew up on bad Roger Moore Bond films, in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So that was my introduction to all this stuff. And then I worked at a men's magazine for many years where every single issue it felt like there was how to be like Bond. So I kind of got a bit sick of that. And then in the mid-noughties, early noughties, the Bourne stuff came out, and your Casino Royales, and everything got a little bit grittier. As you'll see from the horror stuff, I have a sort of tendency towards the darkness. So that Bourne stuff where it's really horrible and people are going to get killed and it's not glamorous, I think that's the stuff that I like the most.
So what you're saying is you're not a fan of Condor Man?
I remember the name from being a kid, but I haven't seen that, I don't think.
It's one of the craziest Disney films you'll come across in the 80s, and they did some crazy stuff in the 80s. But we've had...
Is it Some Mothers Do Have Him? Is it that guy from Some Mothers Do Have Him?
It's the chap... Oh, yes, that's him. Phantom of the Opera guy. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Yeah. Michael Crawford, thank you. Yes, that's him. Yeah, he plays a spy who also can fly. It's a great little rhyme. He's the Condor Man.
It's on the
list.
list.
There you go. But, okay, so you were into more of the gritty, the Bournes of the world. And, I mean, that genre has definitely evolved from that point. I think the Bourne Identity was kind of the watershed moment for that. But, yeah, you've gone on to do all kinds of different things. Like the Taken films have span off in their own way of doing that sort of stuff. All kinds of things. But I think Casino Royale was probably the benchmark for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a masterpiece. I love that film.
And if you were to, I mean, you said you grew up on the Roger Moores of it all. Is there one you could point to as your favourite?
My favourite Bond? I mean, it probably grew up on the Daltons. So, I mean, yeah, that was a bleak era. My favourite Bond film. Well, can I have Casino Royale, or does that not count?
Oh, you can have that one for sure.
I mean, I think that is pretty much hands down the best that's been made in my lifetime. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Casino Royale.
It tends to get mentioned as many people's number one. So that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. Well, I think the next question is to you, Cam. What on earth are we talking about this week?
We are tackling the 2008 Coen brothers film Burn After Reading.
Now, I know you aren't a big fan of comedies because you have no sense of humor.
That's right. Very serious.
So, yeah, very serious, man. So I'm very interested to know a bit about this film. Now, for me, firstly, I actually did watch this film in the past. Usually, I have never seen the film. Almost every week, I have never seen it. So it was actually nice to have seen it and enjoyed it at one point in time. But to you, Matt, do you remember catching this in the theaters when it came out?
You know, there was a gap in my Coen brothers watch list about when they got wacky till about when they started winning Oscars. And I realise this is just after No Country for Old Men, but in my head this was in their wacky period. And so I hadn't seen it. So I was really happy. I watched it with my wife for this podcast, and yeah, really happy to fill in that gap because obviously they're huge filmmakers, and even when they're not firing on all cylinders, it's still really worth a watch.
See, I'm not a guy who's seen many films and many directors or anything like that, so I know who the Coen brothers are. I've seen a few of their films, but I was never able to chart it that way, so I'd be interested to talk about that in a little bit, about that sort of divergence, and they go in the sort of comedy route, and we'll get to that. But Cam, what about you? You seem like the sort of guy that might have seen it.
Yeah, I saw it in theaters, and I just want to note, you referred to me as a serious man. Was that a Coen brothers joke? Because if it was, home run, Scott.
I mean, is it better if I say I have no idea what you're talking about?
That's even better. Okay, moving on. So for me, I remember the period after Fargo where that movie was massively acclaimed, several Oscar nominations, Best Actress win, and then they followed up with Big Lebowski. And it was met with a lot of lukewarm reviews and people kind of being like, well, it's okay. And I remember seeing it on home video and really, really loving it and kind of being shocked that it didn't get more of a, worthy reception when it came out. And obviously that's the one that went on to have a huge cult following and is now regarded as one of their best. And I had that reaction that many critics had to Big Lebowski to Burn After Reading, where I had absolutely loved No Country for Old Men. And then I went the following year and watched Burn After Reading, and I walked out pretty unhappy. I actually dug up my review, and it was like, oh, this is like, whatever kind of mood I was in when I watched it in 2008, it was very clear that I did not respond to what that movie was offering. And I think I have a bit of a caveat, which is that, I'm a big fan of, Roger Ebert's criticism. And he was big enough to later in life be like, hey, I had it wrong with The Godfather Part 2. I had it wrong with The Shining. And I clearly, I think, had it wrong with Burn After Reading. A lot of what I was angry about that first time are things the movie's very intentionally trying to do. So it was just interesting watching it the other night and going like, oh man, I had to even dig up the review because I'm like, my memories do not match the experience I'm having. So, yeah.
I mean, you've teased it now. Do we get to hear this review in a bit?
No. I don't. You know what? I was very proud digging up a clip of my Taken 2 review, which I thought was really clever and funny. This one just made me cringe.
Now I really want to hear it. Oh, what a shame. I'll see if I can convince you by the end of the episode to read it out to us.
You know what? I'll pull it up, and I can, when we dig into the thoughts now, I will bring that up. But
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think before we get into how the Coen brothers got to this film, let's read out the letterboxd.com synopsis for those who haven't actually seen the film. Burn After Reading. Intelligence is relative. When a disc containing memoirs of a former CIA analyst falls into the hands of gym employees Linda and Chad, they see a chance to make enough money for Linda to have life-changing cosmetic surgery. Predictably, events whirl out of control for the duo and those in their orbit.
Sure. I mean,
yeah.
Summing up a Coen brothers movie is always kind of pointless. Even they themselves, whenever you ask them, on press tours, like what their movies are about, they give kind of nonsensical answers.
The film, Cam, I think I read a review today. I can't remember who it was from, actually, unfortunately. But he said, there's no way I can sum up the plot, so I'm just going to not bother talking about it. So I can appreciate them trying to bring it down to one paragraph. Yeah. Well, Cam, you spoke about all these films they did before it that were, highly regarded. And then how did we end up with a spy comedy?
Well, they said they made a spy comedy or a spy film because, I don't know, never done one before. Why not? So
That's some energy right there. I appreciate them just like, hey, all right, sure, let's try it.
Well, has anyone here, I would imagine that Matt has, read or listened to a Coen Brothers interview on their press tour or to one of their film commentaries on the DVDs?
No, afraid not.
Okay. It's a lot of just monosyllabic, like, yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. There you have it. That
On their
sort of
commentary tracks.
Uh-huh. Long pauses, like, oh yeah, that was kind of fun. Things like that. Like, yeah, they don't tend to like to talk about their work a lot. So the insight they give is usually either very vague or intentionally misleading because they're just not that interested in those conversations.
Well, that's what we're here for.
That's right. That's right. So this was, as I said, the follow-up to No Country for Old Men, which had won 4 Oscars for Best Picture, Directing, Writing, Adapted Screenplay, and then Supporting Actor for Javier Bardem. And they'd done a little short film in between for the anniversary of the Cannes Film Festival, but this was their major film follow-up, and also marked the first original screenplay they'd written since 2001's The Man Who Wasn't There. Otherwise, they've been adapting material since then, although some of these adaptations are very loose, and I would say it's a question of whether it is actually original versus adapted material, but nonetheless. And they said that this movie was their Dueling Idiots movie.
Yep, they nailed that.
Yeah, they said their main goal was to just throw a bunch of really fun characters together and just watch them kind of bounce off one another. And they wrote all of the characters with actors in mind, minus it seems like Tilda Swinton. That one I guess they weren't sure about, but everyone else, it was like Brad Pitt, George Clooney, Frances McDormand. They knew exactly who they wanted for all these roles.
There's such a peculiar cast of characters that it does feel very much focused on those actors. But I would have said Tilda Swinton knew exactly what she was doing with this.
Oh yeah.
So I can buy that they did have her in mind particularly. I'm curious though, Matt, when you obviously we'll get to your thoughts on the film. You've just sort of experienced it for the show, but what was your opinion on sort of the Coen brothers? What do you think of their work?
Wow, that's a biggie. I guess, like I say, I mean, it doesn't really work this way, but you try and put the people into boxes, and they've had such an amazing career. It feels like they've moved through phases. So, like I say, it felt like they had their wacky phase, which wasn't really me. The early phase with Blood Simple and all that stuff was pretty amazing and got them really noticed. And then there was like the big Oscar phase with No Country for Old Men. And yeah, I just watched, is it Joel or Ethan's Macbeth for the award season? So I mean, this is like an extraordinary breadth of material, and so what do I think of them? I guess depends on which 5-year period like we're going to pick. I was expecting, because this had Clooney in it, because I felt like it was a follow-on from Oh Brother Where Art Thou and Intolerable Cruelty, I was expecting it to be really sort of heightened and wacky and a bit annoying, but actually that isn't what happened.
Yeah, that's interesting. I tend to find myself more drawn to their darker material. So things like Blood Simple,
Yeah.
No Country. Big Lebowski was always sort of the outlier in that I really loved that one. But something like Raising Arizona didn't grab me as much because when they would go really wacky, I would kind of pull back a little bit. So I think that was, especially back when I was seeing this movie the first time, that was my issue. Was like, this just wasn't the type of movie from them that I easily connected to. But couple other notes I'll make just on the development. This was the first film not to have cinematographer Roger Deakins work with them since 1990's Miller's Crossing. He's one of their key collaborators. Since then, they've worked with them every time since. But for this film, they brought in Emanuel Lubezki, who was very acclaimed. He had worked on Children of Men, and he'd done like Terrence Malick's The New World. He'd also done Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, and he would go on to be a 3-time Oscar winner, 3 in a row. He won for Gravity, Birdman, and Revenant between 2014 to 16, and just worked with them the one time here, and then they were back to Deakins, but Deakins at the time was busy doing Revolutionary Road for Sam Mendes.
I mean, I'm not really well up on their sort of other films, so I couldn't really compare and contrast. But could either of you tell?
The cinematography.
Yeah. It's sometimes it's quite jarring. It can be. I don't think I could really see the difference personally.
I think if maybe I did a side by side, yes, but I think like it's so much I find with cinematographers depends on how strong the visual sense of the director is, and the Coen brothers seem very particular. So I don't know that it jumped out hugely to me.
Okay.
Also, this is a film without a super strong visual style. It's there, it's in the performances, it's set in the real world ostensibly. So certainly, with no disrespect to Mr. Lubetsky, the cinematography wasn't the thing that stood out on the first watch. It felt like a functional aspect.
It was John Malkovich working out, wasn't it? That was what stood out.
Obviously. And Carter Burwell, who did the score for this film and most of their other movies, he based the score for this movie on Jerry Goldsmith's score for the 1964 film 7 Days in May, which starred Burt Lancaster. And it was intentionally percussive, and the idea was, according to the info he received from the Coens, they wanted a very percussive score that means absolutely nothing.
There's going to be a lot of these anecdotes where it's just like shrug of shoulder, isn't it? I'm getting that feeling.
Yeah, because on the press notes, written by the Coens themselves, Ethan Coen wrote, "Like Advise and Consent, this is about the personal meeting the political with melodrama. Burn After Reading is also our version of a Tony Scott, Jason Bourne kind of movie without the explosions."
Okay. These guys are. I'm starting to like these guys. Maybe we should get them in for an interview and just see how awkward that would be.
It'd be brutal. But I looked up Advise and Consent. I wasn't familiar. It's a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel by Alan Drury, and it did inspire a 1962 film by Otto Preminger that I haven't seen. So the fact they're just dropping Advise and Consent in their press notes is amazing, because I would imagine a lot of critics would have been having to look that up.
Someone probably had to read it.
Oh, yeah.
Do you not feel that there's an element of, with those guys, of sort of contrarian, and they're kind of, no, we're going to do this. We're going to do a spy movie without any of the normal spy stuff. And then what we're going to do to explain it, we're going to explain it after the fact with this great big long, books that people haven't read. I feel like they have a mordant sense of humor, and they're slightly taking the piss out of this kind of analysis.
I remember when they did "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" and they were on the press tour, and they said, "Oh, it's based on Homer's Odyssey." And then they asked them if they'd read the Odyssey, and they're like, "No."
The problem is those things become fact. These things become canonical facts without any investigation, because I guess there's no explanations coming from them, that people start to take this as read.
Well, I like that they don't really give this sort of analysis, because it means that people like us have to then do it, and then we spend hours doing the analysis, and then they get the ultimate laugh because we spent hours of our lives examining a film they've made.
And it's just like they also seem to give almost no direction to their actors. Like, there was a funny story with Brad Pitt where they said they wrote this role for him, and he read it and he's like, "This guy is a complete idiot. Like, I don't know that I can play someone this stupid. Like, it's going to be tough for me." And Joel Coen, I think he said, was just like, "You'll be fine."
Okay, I'm liking these guys. Keep going.
Yeah, and so there's little clips in this movie of a movie called Coming Up Daisy, a rom-com, is clearly them kind of spoofing rom-com conventions. Those sequences were directed by their friend Sam Raimi. So I thought that was very fun. And they used to live with Sam Raimi back in the day. They also wrote Sam Raimi's second film, Crime Wave. So the connections between those guys are very close. And it's fun to see them crediting Sam Raimi on I believe the poster for Coming Up Daisy has his name.
I'm just trying to think of. I did see them recently I watched Darkman for the first time, and they're in a car.
Yeah, that's right.
Randomly, yeah. A little Sam Raimi connection there.
Yep. So the budget for this one was $37 million. Domestically, it did $60.3. International, $103.4, for a worldwide total of $163.7, which is kind of insane given the movie we're about to talk about.
That means everyone went to basically go. Not everyone went to go see it. That would be an insane amount of money. But the people genuinely wanted to turn up for this film, and I have no sense of what the marketing must have been like. Because how do you do a trailer for this film?
I think what they did was they marketed the stars, and that probably got people to show up.
Yep, very good point.
And also you throw on, from the directors of No Country for Old Men, which just won the Oscar, it would have had enough marketing material for them to push it. I don't think audiences were caring about Advise and Consent references.
A minute and a half, like just clips of George Clooney saying, I think I could get in a run.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the movie landed at number 44 at the worldwide box office for that year, right between Four Christmases and The Happening. That is a sandwich right there.
I can't say I've seen either of those. Is The Happening a horror film?
Yeah, that's the M. Night Shyamalan one with the plants.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Legendarily bad.
Is it part of that like post Signs, post Sixth Sense Shyamalan stuff where it's just not very good?
Oh, it's legendarily bad. Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
I'm surprised
Okay.
you actually haven't seen it because it's become like this cult classic of all-time worst movies.
I just go back and watch The Room on repeat when I want bad movies. That's all I'll ever need. And The House on 92nd Street.
If you want to see characters try to outrun the wind, watch The Happening.
Okay. All right.
Top 3 for the year. Number 1 was The Dark Knight. Number 2, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And number 3 was Kung Fu Panda. A few other spy movies this year, or films we've covered on the podcast, or will. Number 7 was Quantum of Solace. Number 15, Wanted. Number 27, Get Smart. Number 28, Taken. Number 55, Body of Lies, the Ridley Scott film. And number 162, Traitor, starring Don Cheadle. And just my final note, this movie was completely shut out of the Oscars. It was just not a critical darling over here. But over in the UK, you guys got it. It actually got 3 BAFTA nominations for Best Screenplay, Best Supporting Actor for Brad Pitt, and Best Supporting Actress for Tilda Swinton.
Huh. I haven't got into the review yet, but it definitely has a particular sense of humor to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just, if you look up the reviews by American critics at the time, there was a lot of, I think, the sort of attitude I was bringing as well, is like, this is them wasting their time after No Country.
Okay. Well, I'm fascinated now. I want to start with Matt. We're talking about it. This is Matt's first time watching it. So what do you think of this film, sir?
It's difficult. So like with like ordinary punter hat on or critic hat on, I enjoyed it. It's great fun to see all these great names, huge stars all playing around, and the Coens sort of put them all in one place and just set them running. So you've got Brad Pitt here doing this and John Malkovich doing that. All these great sort of people that you're so familiar with, and that was fun. It was really short, it was punchy, it moves along. I've got to say, overall, it was a sense of it ended with a sense of meh. It ended with a sense of kind of intentionally, there's no big climax. We don't see how anyone's stories play out. We hear how they play out, and so there's like an intentional. We're not going to have any sort of spy theatrics. We're not going to have any climax. So it was like the Coens setting all this amazing stuff in motion, and then saying, "Ha ha, sort of screw you. Yeah, we're not going to end this how you think we are. We're going to end this in a kind of sort of quite a downbeat. Well, none of it really matters kind of way, which is all well and good and all clever in your screenplay, but in your viewing experience means that I was laughing, I was enjoying it, and then it got to the end and I was like, oh, well, what was the point of that? And there's something that when they do that right, it feels really brave. There's moments in No Country for Old Men that sort of subvert your expectations and do that. And other times it feels really, almost like a bit disrespectful. It's almost a bit like, it ends with the spy satellite watching events, and it just cuts up and up and up and up to that satellite, and it just feels like a bit like they're just up there directing, and who cares what the viewers think, which sometimes is really cool, and sometimes is a bit like, oh, come on guys, like just invested 90 minutes in this, like give me something to go home with. And I know it's not accidental. I know they didn't fuck up. Like I know they're insanely talented and they're doing something on purpose, but that thing on purpose can be frustrating as a viewer experience.
Yeah, I think it was I don't know what they're like. I'm starting to learn what they're like. So definitely that ending was a choice they made. But it's interesting because we recently covered and finally wrapped up the Spy Kids films. Well, well, Rodriguez is trying to change that. There might be a 5th one. I don't know. Please don't. Please don't. Anyway, in that first film, around about, was it 2002 that came out, Cam?
2001.
2001. This is a kids' film. It's a comedy, but you could tell Rodriguez has a passion for the genre of spy films and actually cares about it a little bit. And there's maybe something I bumped on with this, and I will agree with you, Matt. I think they just show sort of apathy towards the genre, and it doesn't deserve them to pay attention. We do a spy movie podcast, so of course we care about the genre. That's what we do. But I don't know, that whole ending. You spent 90 minutes investing in the characters, and I mean, you just find out off screen basically that half of them got killed and the other ones are just, I don't know, being sent off on planes, and you just kind of shrug. And that feels like there could have been a different way of ending it, but who am I to argue with the Coen brothers? So I just sit there going, okay.
What they do really well is they take sort of ordinary little people and spin their stories out. But it happens really well in Fargo. Happens. Frances McDormand's character here is just works in a gym, wants to get her body done, and this is her big ticket. And they take their destiny suddenly spun out of their control and takes them somewhere ... But in this place, as you say, it just takes them to like a grey CIA room where everything is like signed, sealed, stamped, and then put back in the thing. And that. It's quite a novel way to do the spy thing, It's making it sort of micro rather than macro. But yeah, also, this is in places quite a big, broad comedy, and then it just it ends with such a sigh.
Well, okay, Cam, you've teased us with your very impassioned hatred, almost by the sounds of it, of the original version of this film. So I need to know what you think about it now. But I think you might have queued up what you thought about it then.
Yeah, so I pulled it up, and it opened with with a joke that was in... Well, I'll just read the joke that I wrote. So, a guy walks into a bar. It's in Chicago, and it's raining hard outside. Now, the guy is wearing a gray overcoat with a battered fedora and nerdy glasses. He's an accountant. Anyways, the guy takes off his coat and hangs it on a crooked coat rack and walks up to the bartender, who's about 60. The bartender is nervously reaching for the telephone, but the guy doesn't see that. So the guy looks at him and says, "What do you recommend for a wet accountant?" The barman looks him up and down and says, "Whiskey on the rocks." The guy drinks it and leaves. The above anecdote best explains how I felt walking out of Burn after reading. An anarchic ensemble comedy that jerks and shoves the audience through a litany of plot twists and turns, only to deposit them, breathless and impatient, back into their seats, pat them on the head, and inform them that the punchline is that there isn't one. Thanks for coming, folks. Don't forget your jackets on the way out. I was annoyed.
Wow.
Boom. I mean,
2008 Cam was going for the neck on that one. That's a fierce rebuttal of the film.
And it's funny because, I think on one hand, I was bang on. That is kind of what the movie's doing. But at the same time, watching it the other night, it felt much more as in, yes, that is specifically what the punchline is. And I think I really responded to it a lot more this time. I knew what the ending was bringing. I knew that essentially I was going to have those CIA guys just kind of writing everything off, zoom out, credits. And so I found myself much more drawn into the idea of an espionage film in which there's no real espionage whatsoever. It's people just basically running around in circles, letting kind of their personal lives spiral out of control. And then B, I think it's something that I would not have understood when I wrote that, as what, a 20-something university student, which is having now been in the working world for quite a long time, 20 plus years, I guess, you begin to realize at a certain point, all organizations are kind of run through essentially children and adults' bodies. Everyone can have the best of intentions, but there's always a high degree of mess associated, which is why I tend to now struggle with conspiracy theories, because the idea of everyone working together to create a conspiracy that is completely effective does not make any sense after you've been in a working professional situation. And so I kind of like that this movie, that's kind of the point of its treatment of the CIA, is we tend to look at them in movies like Bourne, for example, as these sort of overlords who are controlling all the chess pieces. And the movie is ultimately underscoring that, no, they're the same as these nincompoops running around with this disk of financial information just causing chaos.
So you've almost 180'd on it then, I'd say.
I guess what I've done is 180'd on my how I responded to what they're doing. I think the first time it actually really frustrated me, because I remember also being put off by how mean-spirited it was towards the two nicest characters in the movie. And this time I responded more to it as just very, very funny, very dark comedy. So maybe it's just the years.
Yeah, you're just more withered and full of hate now.
I have nothing left, Scott. Nothing.
That's what 2 years of spy movies will do to you, I think.
It's the Spy Kids series, Scott. Thanks.
Okay. Well, we seem to have a contrasting of opinions here between the two of you, which is nice. I like that. It breeds conversation. I think I unfortunately sit somewhere in the middle between the two of you. I enjoyed it the first time I watched it, but maybe I didn't think too deeply about it, and that's why I probably enjoyed it, because it's just kind of a quirky comedy and poking fun at the stereotypes, the sort of like the things that spy movies do. And now looking back on it, the first time, because I always watch the films twice, the first time I rewatched it, I definitely got a bit more of Cam's original thoughts. And my notes say the same thing, where like, hey, it's just poking fun, but like it's mean-spirited. And then my second rewatch, I just sort of realized this is just a big shrug and poking fun at the whole idea of having a trope. And this whole idea of like, that Jason Bourne is this amazing spy out there, whereas really is just a bunch of idiots running around in tuxedos. And I think that's ultimately a very funny idea, that really what we're being shown in these films is nowhere near the truth, and really it's just people just about getting by and going home at the end of the day.
Right.
And I think so overall, I think it's a refreshingly quirky and interesting take on a spy film. And I think we've had so many different types of spy films on the show so far. It's fun to have something that's outside of the box.
And it's something, when we started the podcast, I was genuinely concerned that, sure, weeks 1 through 12 are fun, but by the time we start getting into a year in, are we just watching essentially the same movie every week? And that has not been the case, because they kind of bounce all over the place, and there's nothing quite like this one.
No, and I think that might be something we'll circle back to later. But yeah, it's interesting that it takes these two to come at it from this angle, and yet we've been having spy films since, I don't know, the 1920s. It's probably our earliest one on the list. And I mean, maybe there is an earlier example that we haven't come across in like the 30s or 40s, some sort of poking fun at the tropes, or maybe something in the late 60s with all the Bond spoofs that you had at the time. But this just feels so unique that I can't help but smile when I watch it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about things that we did like before we sort of focus on some other things. But I'll throw to you, Matt, a particular thing about your film you enjoyed.
Look, so these are pretty much some of the best actors in the business. So just watching them do their stuff is so much fun. Like you say, why did audience go to see that? They went because who doesn't want to go and spend time with Clooney and Pitt and McDormand? And so some of their like little moments I loved. Like I love George Clooney is a sort of, he's subverting his George. He's a womanizer, but he's otherwise subverting his George Clooney image because he's an idiot, and he's making his wife a very, very special present all the way through the movie. And then when you realise what the present is, you realise, spoilers, it's a sort of swing chair with a cheap-looking dildo that just arches up at what might be a sort of opportune rhythm. And what's so funny is he's so amazingly proud of this, and he shows it to Tilda Swinton, and he's sort of proud, and he speaks to his wife near the end of the film, and he says, "But honey, you've got to come home, your present's ready." And you just realise that he's been planning this terrible sex toy for ages, and that's really funny. And it's also doubly funny that it's super smooth George doing it. I love Brad. I love this. Frances McDormand's amazing, and there's one thing in the film that she does really, really well, is that she plays this sort of slightly cartoony character, but because she's such a good actor, she brings pathos to it. So she says at one point, I wrote this down because I just love this, and this is like good Coen stuff. And she says to Brad, she says, "This is your opportunity. You don't get many of these. You slip on ice outside a fancy restaurant, or something like this happens." And it's that idea that you're such a nobody that all of your life, the best thing that might happen is that you fall on some ice and consume a restaurant, or you find a disc of CIA secrets and can use it to blackmail. Those are your two options. Other than that, it's all just going to be boring. And there's something so tragic in that line that, yeah, I really love that.
And they're just, I completely agree. And I love that the main characters, for the most part, are just so completely earnest.
Yeah.
And you can't help but root for them a little bit. I mean, some of them are bigger assholes than the others.
Yeah.
But, and they're all actually kind of bad guys at the same time, because almost all cheating on each other with someone else. And I love that in another parallel strange spy universe, the head of the OSS, or the president of the United States, George Clooney, from the Spy Kids was building a sex chair. That's a strange world I'm living in.
And I love the ways they tease that, where it shows dramatic moments of him like building it, and they're obscuring what it is. And then his big breakdown moment is smashing the sex chair.
And it keeps like bobbing up and down. The sex toy just keeps flopping around in the wind.
Oh yeah,
I love the bit where he reveals it to Frances McDormand, and there's like a pause where she looks at it, and like you're meant to think she's going to think it's horrible. Then she goes, "Oh, that's really nice," and just like it actually really enjoys it. But you also can tell there's no like deviancy in a sense with Clooney. He's just a very sexually positive man. He just thinks this is a cool thing to build. There's nothing like creepy about it, and that's why he calls his wife and says, "Hey, your present's waiting for you," because it's not sinister. It's just fun, I guess, for him.
But it's also like a group of characters who are feeling unfulfilled and seeking happiness in ways that is ultimately their undoing. You know, like Frances McDormand just wants to get plastic surgery to feel better about herself.
Don't we all?
And it's this pursuit of the money that ultimately leads to a lot of the dire things. You know, her teaming up with Pitt to sell this disc is ultimately what brings about his death. And it seems that's the case for so many of the characters. Richard Jenkins just wants to win the approval of Frances McDormand, so he goes to the house and gets himself, killed with an axe. It's just this endless string of the kind of lonely, unfulfilled people, like just reaching out for happiness and having it just bite their hands.
I do love just that sense of humanity in the film, because we've all had moments, maybe not where we go out and build a sex chair, but moments of desperation in our lives, and I think we can sympathize with that.
Yeah.
What about you, Cam? Something you liked?
I want to just say Brad Pitt is absolutely incredible in this movie. Like, you don't see him do enough of these big comic performances, but he is so fantastic. I think my favorite scene, maybe in the whole movie, is him in the car talking to John Malkovich and doing the squint at him, like trying to look like this imposing like spy figure. It's essentially an idiot putting on a performance throughout this movie, and I'm not referring to Brad Pitt as an idiot so much as the character of Chad is an idiot putting on this act of how a spy might work. And like scenes where he's on the phone talking to Malkovich in the middle of the night are just I was really laughing out loud at moments like that. And honestly, I don't know if I was when I saw it in theaters. And also, like, something else that made me genuinely really laugh this time that I think, as I kind of indicated in my initial review, annoyed the hell out of me the first time, was the J.K. Simmons at the end. All of his delivery of this just like, well, okay, I guess we learned something. I don't know what we learned, but I guess we learned something, so we won't do that again, whatever that was. Bits like that, I think, are just so incredibly well delivered. It's one of those benefits you get when you cast just bona fide movie stars in these types of parts.
Yeah, we've seen so many films now with like men in rooms talking about what's happening in the film, trying to give you exposition, trying to like lead you in the film. But like this is the anti-version of that. This is the complete opposite, where they're just shrugging because they can't make sense of the plot, nor can you particularly. So you just have fun with it, and I like that sort of taking the legs out of the genre. There's not many. Because you look at like the 60s spy spoofs and then like the return they had with the Johnny Englishes, like we mentioned, and the Austin Powers. But they never really deal with the underlying problems that spy films sometimes have. They just more deal with the funny bits. And I like that this film actually goes, no, this is completely ludicrous that this sort of stuff happens. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, like there's a sense of the absurd in this movie. And that's something that's common throughout the Coen brothers' work. But here it feels like they double down, and it's one of those things that they do every now and again where they really double down on the absurd, and they're often criticized for running their characters through the gamut and not being particularly kind to them. And I think that was also something that people who didn't respond to this movie could very much point to and be correct in criticizing this movie for.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if I'm going to bring up, I had a couple of likes, but the first one that springs up in sort of my list in front of me is this is definitely well written in the sense of there's setup and payoff throughout the film. You've got everything from the sex chair, like we mentioned, the private detective that follows George Clooney around the film. You think it's a spook that's chasing him, but really it's actually his wife trying to divorce him whilst he spent the entire film breaking up relationships himself. So that comes back to bite him in the arse. And also like the cosmetic surgery of it all that actually like really sets this film in motion is Frances McDormand trying to get cosmetic surgery to be her better self according to whatever she's got in her psyche. And by the end, they just kind of write it off and just sort of say, yeah, give her the money. And I like that it has setup and payoff throughout. The other thing I've just wanted to say is I felt really bad for Richard Jenkins.
Oh, I mean, they want you to.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
And I would just also, in terms of, this is more of a personal one, I spent many years working in gyms, and it was the weirdest thing to see Frances McDormand selling gym memberships. And I've done that tour around that gym, and I've said, oh yeah, this is the quiet time. And it was just so weird seeing someone be me in a film. I then immediately went to try and get cosmetic surgery as well.
Did you feel seen?
I did feel seen, yes. But any other likes, chaps? I'll throw it out.
I would say that John Malkovich's pronunciation of memoir
Oh,
is something
yeah.
that I will carry with me forever.
No, you see in the film that there's two words that the Coens are behind the camera going, go on again. And that whenever he goes, memoir, like they just rinse that. And also every time someone says Osborne Cox, which is Malkovich's characters, you can see that there's a pause and they go, so what about this Osborne Cox? And someone somewhere is just like, a bit more on the Cox, because they just love pronouncing those words. And yeah, those bits are really funny, definitely.
Also, the George Clooney going for runs that they bring up multiple times is always funny.
I did have a question regarding the memoir.
Yes.
Do you think you could write a memoir about your life right now and people would buy it?
Well, that's two different questions there. Could I write a memoir? Probably. My memory's fairly strong. I could probably do enough anecdotes, but would anyone buy it? No. Maybe you, at best.
No. I talk to you every day. I'm not buying your memoir.
Well, maybe I would buy my own copy and then mail it to you for Christmas.
Oh.
So that's one sold.
At least maybe you'd sign it, I guess.
Yeah.
What about you, Matt? Do you think you have enough life experience for a memoir?
The thing is, it's a big call. So if you write all of your deepest, darkest secrets in a book, firstly, you risk burning everyone you've ever loved.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, as you say, if you write that book and the book is terrible, or let's say it's a masterpiece, but no one wants to read it, that is heartbreak. So no, I wouldn't.
And you're a man that's put books out into the world, so you're the expert in that sense.
Yes, and it's much more fun when they're successful than when they're not, and they don't contain the deepest, darkest secrets of my soul. So, it's like I've survived both success and failure. And so, yeah, if I put everything out there and someone was like, God, this is boring, 2 stars, I don't think I'd recover from that. Why would I do that?
So is this a spoiler that your literary agent won't be getting a call as this for the next pitch?
Well, make me an offer, but no, no.
It's a job. No. You feel so bad for Malkovich when Swinton's turning around just going, who would read that? Like, it's just so gutting. But like, everyone's had that person in their life when they try to do something creative, and they'd be like, who would listen to that podcast about spy movies?
Oh yeah, and I think it's actually kind of funny too, in that you have Malkovich. He's this CIA guy, right? Like in theory, he would know secrets. Like his book could really offer something. But I think the movie then spends the next 100 minutes essentially establishing that no, he wouldn't really know anything of interest whatsoever.
And also, when you say that when it's John Malkovich cast in this role as a CIA agent, you're like, right, this guy's going to be the shit. He's going to know everything. He's going to know where the bodies are buried. He's going to be the J.K. Simmons character. And then the reality is he's an idiot like everyone else, which is really unusual seeing Malkovich. Like, he's so commanding. It's unusual to see him playing such a buffoon as well.
It's weird, though, when I think of Malkovich in the realm of sort of the spy genre, he doesn't do a lot. And the only other thing that pops to mind is his role in, do you remember the 2 Red movies, the Bruce Willis films? And it's like he plays kind of a whack job in those movies as well. I don't think we've ever seen like a serious Malkovich take on a spy movie.
There's got to be one in the 90s or something he did that we haven't stumbled across yet.
One would hope, but nothing's popping to mind at least.
Well, I'm sure we'll find it eventually.
Sure.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Agents, pardon the interruption, but we have some top secret intel.
That's right. Independent podcasting is not cheap. Equipment, hosting, research. We don't have Townsend Agency resources.
And also, we don't want to run ads on the show. No one wants to hear that shit, Tucky mushrooms. And this is a big reason we created the SpyHards Patreon.
So we're here asking for your help. Please consider joining the Patreon. You'll not only be gaining access to our exclusive lineup of reviews and film commentaries, but also helping support the show. We're currently saving to upgrade our sound equipment to bring your listening experience up to Q Branch standards.
With a wide range of flexible options and an ever-growing catalogue to dive into. Become a true spy hard today and enter the Xander Zone at patreon.com/spyhards. That's SPYHARDS, or you can find a link in the show notes below. Now, Cam, on with the spy jinx. I suppose then maybe we'll pivot over to dislikes and quibbles, things that we have for the film. Matt, you first.
What we've been talking about, this love-hate, this sort of balancing act that the Coen brothers do with sort of seeming to give it all and then withdrawing, is my bad. And actually, you've been talking really eloquently about that. So that talking about it afterwards, I like the film more. But yeah, that all of that thing of the sort of seeming to be above it all, up in space, setting this all in motion, and then not necessarily individually paying it off so you can see it, not having any of the things we expect from spy films. All of those, you could put those as both good and bad, but those feel like demerits to the experience. One of the things which I haven't touched upon yet is the big spoilerific death of Brad Pitt. Is this the place to do that?
Oh, spoil away.
Go for it.
Well, it's not that I feel good or bad about it. The thing, and this is what one of the things that's really annoying about being a critic or writing about film, so way back before the internet got this big, is that even before that point, things would be spoiled for you because people would tell you stuff or whatever. So I haven't seen this film from 2008. It's 13 years later. I have not seen this movie, but I sat there with my wife watching it knowing that Brad Pitt was going to get his brains blown out. I was like, oh, come on. Like, at least, so she was really surprised and shocked, which obviously I think everyone would have been in 2008. But yeah, this is one of those things you can't have. None of those secrets don't exist anymore. And obviously less so now, but I thought that might be safe. So yeah, I knew that one was coming. And so it wasn't shocking. And it just felt mean.
It's interesting because, I had remembered that, but I had completely forgotten about the sex chair. So when I rewatched it, when they went downstairs into the dungeon, I was like, what is that? Oh, okay. We're going for a ride. That
I was in the same boat or same chair, maybe. Yeah, because I also had completely forgotten about the sex chair, but the Brad Pitt death had also really stuck in my mind. I'd actually forgotten about the Richard Jenkins one, which surprised me. When it happened again, I was like, oh, that's right, but I'd forgotten that.
I never noticed the brutal bit because when he's attacking him with the axe, you see one go into his head. There's do you? There's a blood spurt comes out of his head and everything. It's quite gory, actually. It's like a split second, but it's there.
This is the power of memory because I watched it last week and in my head it cut away before it got brutal. There you go.
You don't really see the axe going in, but you see an axe land on his head and then blood crack down his skull and shoot out. It's quite grim actually. But it cuts immediately to the office.
When Jenkins got that script, he must have thought, "There's no way I'm going to live through this film." Pitt, Clooney, Malkovich, hang on, McDormand, Swinton, me. Oh, I'm definitely dead.
And I mean, that's something they so often write about Coen brothers is that their movies take place in this sort of pitiless universe where there is no happy endings for people based on morality. Things can just happen at any time, and that's very clearly in action here with Brad Pitt. You can say, well, he's been up to some maybe kind of shady things, although it's not coming from a place of blackmail, but he does want a reward. But the Richard Jenkins character, that's the one that I remember, looking back, having more of a visceral reaction in theaters of just I don't know that I was prepared to meet the movie at that point on its terms of accepting that sort of level of mean-spiritedness. I was like, well, this is a bunch of, actors having fun on screen. This should be kind of a lighthearted affair. and hitting me with a scene like that feels insincere. And I don't think I felt that way watching it the other night.
Well, let's take it back a little bit and just sort of look at, because Cam and I have been doing spy films for 2 years. I'm not going to say we're experts, but we watched a lot of spy films. Matt, you critique films for a living. You write books about films. I think between us, we probably can form an opinion about films. But films aren't just made for us, the people who analyze them. They're made for general audiences that go to the theaters. And apparently a lot of people turned up to see this film. So if we're looking at that death of Brad Pitt and the death of Richard Jenkins, I think the Brad Pitt one is very abrupt. I'm not sure. I think it surprises you, which spy films do try to do, but I think it's a loss to the film that you lose Brad Pitt like 2/3 in.
Yeah, I mean, viewers must have been gutted, right? Imagine the number of people going to see a comedy from the people that won that Oscar starring Brad Pitt, and then he's in it a tiny bit, and then he takes an early bath in the most brutal way possible. And also, at that point, the film reveals how little it cares about, on one hand, how little it cares about these characters, I say. So in that point, not only is Brad gone, but you also realise you're in a pitiless universe, which is quite the come down if you're just going for like a Friday night good time.
I think the difference between the two big deaths is like the Brad Pitt one does feel a little bit like a punchline. Like it's a very dark punchline, and it's appropriate. These guys are friends with Sam Raimi, because Sam Raimi movies, while more, I think, upbeat and loving of their characters, are filled with that sort of kind of poking humor with the audience. And the Brad Pitt one, it does like pay off with like a lot of very, very funny George Clooney stuff. Where I would say like the Jenkins one, it's not really a punchline, and it's really just a resolution to the Malkovich character. And so it doesn't give you that sort of the relief of the laughter. It's more like a shock moment.
Yeah, I wonder how audiences sort of felt coming out of the theaters, because if people were turning up because of the previous work of the Coen brothers, you know, Big Lebowski, No Country for Old, that sort of stuff, No Country, then I could see why there was like, why people would go, but were they thrilled with it? Critics obviously didn't like it, but I wonder what general audiences thought when they were coming out of the theaters.
Well, have either of you ever been in busy screenings of Coen brothers movies?
No.
No, the ones I've seen at the cinema have been stuff like The Man Who Wasn't There, which there was nobody in the cinema because it's quite a niche proposition.
Yeah, that's a good call there. So
aptly named.
No, I loved it, but yeah, it wasn't a busy screening. Turns out.
No. So I saw Burn After Reading at a matinee, as I recall. So like it wasn't particularly busy. Like it would have been a weekday, but I did see No Country and A Serious Man opening weekend in relatively full theaters. And there was like visceral anger from the audience when the movie ended, where you could genuinely hear people like just basically gasp in annoyance when the movie ends kind of abruptly. Like both of them have very abrupt endings. And there was just that the deflated like, ugh, kind of response. And then people complaining about the movie when it was over. That seems to be kind of a common thing I've experienced with Coen brothers movies, where they pull in a crowd because they got movie stars. They can really put together good trailers. And I genuinely think the average person doesn't really know who the Coen brothers are. So they're just showing up for the movie stars and kind of there you go. Like Scott, you're, I guess, a more casual. You've seen a few, but you wouldn't necessarily call yourself a lifelong, worshiper of their work. And that's the common thing. People show up because they see Brad Pitt, George Clooney, Frances McDormand, stars like that. And they get an experience that is not like a mainstream comedy and is actively ridiculing mainstream comedies in the Dermot Mulroney film here. And I think they're often left deflated, but they keep showing up because of the star power in these movies.
Well, I'm sure we could spend hours dissecting what people think about the Coen brothers films. I think it's an interesting experiment to put it in front of general audiences, because I think if you're a spy movie fan, there's probably some interesting things to take from this film, but we try and cater for both here. But Cam, I'm interested, what's something you have as a dislike?
I don't know that there's anything I can really point to as a major issue for me. I think what there is, though, is just sort of the nagging sense in the back of my brain that when measured against the rest of the Coen brothers filmography, this is more of a minor film than a major. And when I'm talking the majors, it's stuff like Blood Simple, No Country, Fargo, A Serious Man, I really, really love. And I'm actually a really big fan of The Ballad of Buster Scruggs from a couple years ago. Whereas like this one, I kind of put on a similar plateau as something like, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Or Hail Caesar from a couple years ago. So I guess just in that regard, I don't think it's quite inspired enough to belong in the conversation for their best work, but I think it's a really good example of their comedy, which often falls kind of flat with me with some of their really wacky films.
Well, it's interesting because we haven't tackled many comedies on the show, straight comedies. We've had like spoof films, we've had Liquidator, stuff like that. But, I remember we had Central Intelligence last year. You didn't find that funny. So, it's in terms of that side of things, Cam, did you find this laugh out loud funny?
At several points, yes.
Is this the closest to what you would call a successful comedy that we've tackled so far?
I don't regard it as like a mainstream comedy, though. So, for a very specific brand of comedy, yes, but it's not the sort of thing that I would say all movies need to be like this in a theater to make everyone laugh. Like I look at something like 40-Year-Old Virgin and I go, that's a pretty perfect audience experience. This one is very specific. It's more of a cult audience type of vibe.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the only dislike I've got left that hasn't really been mentioned, we haven't dug too much into, is I just have trouble with... I suppose we have kind of dug into it a little bit, but there's no one really to root for in this film. There's no lead protagonist, and everyone's basically an asshole. And that can be interesting viewing if you're looking at cinema and trying to dig into the depths of what film can do. But for the average person like me who couldn't tell his Coen brothers film from a Francis Ford Coppola film, I wouldn't know the difference. I just kind of struggle to follow along sometimes and root for anyone, because once Richard Jenkins was probably the closest I had to someone I cared about is oft. You kind of shrug. Like, I don't care that George Clooney's wife had been planning to leave him the whole film because he had it coming.
No.
I don't care that Frances McDormand and Brad Pitt met bad ends because they were trying to extort money. So I think that's perhaps a problem with the film, but I think an intentional problem. Yeah,
like, who would you say that... I don't even know if they would say that you're supposed to root for any of them, but I would say probably Frances McDormand is the most sympathetic character.
Well, she's a very interesting one, and I think probably you're right, actually, because she's clearly someone going through something.
Yeah.
And that focus on trying to, in her mind, better her visual self is a clear case of, in my opinion, sort of body dysmorphia, something that really has become more something we've looked at in more recent years. It's being poked fun at here, but I don't think maliciously. And it's an interesting interpretation of someone going through that. As someone who spent a long time working in gyms, I've seen people who look at themselves in the mirror and genuinely see a different person, and it can be quite the traumatic experience. And so I think she as Matt said earlier, she gets genuine moments of pathos in this film, and I appreciate that the film gives her that opportunity to spotlight that issue.
And also just the experiences with online dating,
Oof.
Which can be crushing. Like, this movie's a little bit ahead of the curve because, now in 2022, you live in an era of Bumble and Tinder and all of these apps. But this is 2008, and you have her going on these dates that are just like crushing, right? Like, there's the one with the really boring dude that ends with her finding the note in the wallet. And you're just like, oh, this poor woman who just... Every scene she's going into these dates, you can see it's just all optimism and just like this need to meet someone, like this actual like wanting someone in her life, and just seeing her get crushed again and again is just, it's tough to watch in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think we could all agree that we would definitely swipe right on George Clooney, though.
As long as he shows me his chair.
Yes.
In Washington D.C., does like everyone on a dating app meet at those benches, those famous benches?
I've had some strange stories in my time of online dating, but never been taken back to someone's house and introduced to their sex chair on a second date, at least anyway. So it's definitely more of a fifth date kind of thing with me.
Right.
Yeah. But a very grim reality, especially a bit like right at the end of the film where she sees the past date who I guess was cheating on his wife as well.
Yeah.
Sitting waiting for his next date / victim. Quite a sad look at what dating has become. But boy, does it make me glad I'm in a long-term relationship.
There you go. Does this movie have anything to say about like disinformation? Because it's something that I think in 2008, I would not have walked out of this movie with any real sense of like, oh yeah, this is really touching on the here and now in a way that I find it particularly impactful. But watching it now in 2022, I'm like, we've lived through some very strange times in the last like 5, 6, 7 years. And suddenly I find the messages of this movie of kind of this information all being interpreted in different ways by different people to be both very funny and also, just kind of sad.
It's kind of scary how quickly this can dissolve and spin out of control. And I think this is how I think this is over the space of about 2 or 3 days, this entire drama. And, 3 people are killed and all sorts of stuff happens from a disc that I think it's never really quite solved. But what was on that disc?
His memoirs.
See, I thought the financial records were also on there too.
I thought it was
maybe.
It's the records, I think, for the divorce proceedings that Tilda Swinton is investigating.
Oh, I thought his memoirs was on there too.
Because they said it was gibberish. Yeah.
I think it might have been, was it both?
Yeah, but I thought, maybe both, because you're right, she scans the files. And then so maybe in doing that, she also gets his memoirs.
Memoir?
And, a memoir. I felt like when we were watching it, I felt like this is a really like prescient vision of the age of surveillance. But I also thought that it was a film made in the late 90s. And when it finished, and I checked, and I was like, 2008. Oh, yeah, we knew all this stuff already. We knew that phones are going to be everywhere. We knew that internet dating is going to be crap. Like, no, maybe not internet dating, but, it felt like that was it, sort of something really clever it brought to the table, is that look at all this power and look how crap it will end up being. And then actually when I realised it was 2008, we were already halfway into that being, that wasn't prescient, that was just what was happening, it feels like.
Spinning off from there, Cam, it's kind of, I'm out of my dislikes now, but I did have a note I was going to bring up, but it really does connect to what you just said. Recently, listeners will know we covered the 1980 Sean Penn film, The Falcon and the Snowman. And I was blown away today by how strangely those two films connect, this and that one. It's all about someone coming across information and trying to sell it to the Russians. Literally happens in both films. One person leaves the priesthood in both films. And I was just blown away by that strange connection between the two and how the story of Falcon and the Snowman could just easily be turned into a comedy version, and that would be this film.
I noticed that after just after I'd finished watching Burn After Reading, I was just looking through Letterboxd at some reviews, and someone mentioned Falcon and the Snowman, and I was like, oh my God.
No way. They mentioned it.
Yeah, it's just like, you're right. Like, I definitely, my ears kind of perked up at the selling information to the Russians stuff, but I was also like, well, is that really that crazy a connection?
No.
But you're right. When you look at kind of the overall, the number of moments, I did the behind the scenes on Falcon and the Snowman. That was not a particularly popular movie, so I don't know. But again, if the Coen brothers are referencing like advise and consent in interviews, like who's to say they didn't watch Falcon and the Snowman on TV one night?
They're just like, hey, check out this really obscure Sean Penn film from like 1983 or whenever it came out, and you can't find it anymore. But that's what's in their like EPK or whatever they sent out. Just a copy of the Falcon and the Snowman.
That and the Odyssey.
Yeah.
I did think it was a great joke, though, of Richard Jenkins mentioning that he spent 14 years in the Greek Orthodox as a priest. You're like, what? Like, what a weird aside.
Yeah, that was good. When he showed the photo of himself, and then he goes, in many ways, I'm a lot happier now. Anyway, I don't want to talk about it. And then it's just on with the film. Yeah, that was cute.
Classic, this film. It sets it up and then,
Yeah, that's the, yeah.
Well, I'll throw it out to the room before we get to the knock list, but any final thoughts? That was my last one. So, Matt, do you have any sort of final notes on the film?
I have no final notes on the film. All of my notes have been disseminated.
And now they're being interpreted and misinterpreted and sold to the Russians.
It's an interesting film because I think when you talk about other films we've done on this podcast, there's a lot of kind of morsels to dig into, whereas a movie like this, you find yourself more, because it's pretty singular in what it's trying to do, that you just find yourself kind of reciting funny lines or moments of performances. Like, I don't know that it has sort of the depth that if we were doing, say, a podcast on No Country for Old Men, I think it offers a lot more conversation points.
I think I have seen that film, although I don't think I can remember it. But if I span that into The Big Lebowski, for instance, I think there's a lot more I could pick apart in that. I think that's a lot more. There's many more visuals in that film that I could talk about than this. I don't think I could really pick out a scene, particularly apart from maybe Brad Pitt's demise in the closet. That's probably and the chair.
Right.
That's probably the only two scenes that will stay with me. In fact, I'm going to go build that chair after this recording.
Although you're like really inept, a handyman, so it's going to look like a nightmare.
If anyone's ever seen It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and is familiar with the Arse Blaster 5000, I believe it's called, which is exactly the same premise but in a bike.
Oh my.
Yeah. And a bigger implement, may I add to.
So I've got a couple little notes I'll just mention. At one point, Clooney says, "We have all the time in the world," where I was like, intentional?
Oh.
I don't know. I mean, again, who knows with the Coen brothers?
Oh, yeah. I could actually, for them, I could genuinely see them just sort of coming up with that line and being like, I've never seen a James Bond film.
Yeah, exactly.
Who's Ian Fleming?
Random anecdote. I remember when Transformers 3 Dark of the Moon opened and Frances McDormand is in that movie, and myself and so many others wondered what it was like for Joel Coen, her husband, to attend the premiere of Transformers 3. What is going through his mind watching that Michael Bay film?
I don't think I can remember Transformers 3, nor am I sure I've ever seen it, but what the hell was Frances McDormand doing in it?
She was like the leader of the secret agency that had the Transformers.
Don't tell me the secret agents in Transformers films.
Moving on.
We're not covering those films. I'm sorry. I can't go back. No.
And my other just note was the actor David Rasche, who is the other CIA agent we have in the conversation scenes with J.K. Simmons. David Rasche is just one of those character actors I've seen pop up in so many things over the years. People really don't know who he is, but I think he's genuinely funny here and has a really good back and forth with J.K. Simmons.
And he was in Men in Black 3.
Really?
Yeah. He played Agent X.
I have no memory of him in that, so, well, he's more memorable here.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all of our notes on Burn after reading, so I think before we finally burn this film, we need to ask that question. Is it making the knock list? Now, Matt, you're our guest. You get the first vote, but because you're our guest, I think Cam just quickly runs through what we're doing here with the knock list.
Yes, the knock list is our tortured acronym for Need to See Official Classics for the SpyHards podcast, where every week after we've talked about a movie, we determine if it belongs on this list we're creating of kind of the all-time great spy films. So movies that have made it onto the list: North by Northwest, GoldenEye, Goldfinger, 3 Days of the Condor. Scott, are there any comedies on there? Spy Kids actually made it on.
Spy Kids 1's on there. As
yeah.
Kind of like a... Yeah, no, I think... We've only had like Central Intelligence, which wasn't that funny.
Our Man Flint made it on.
Oh yeah, Our Man Flint. Yep, I suppose it's more of a spy spoof, I would say, than a straight comedy. But go on.
Yeah, so in certain cases, it's not necessarily like they have to be the 5-star carved in stone classics, but it's like they're important representation for an aspect of the genre, which is how, for example, Spy Kids gets on, of what it's doing with the genre at that particular time. So, yeah, that sort of sums up what the list is.
So I'll put the question to you, sir. Burn after reading, is it making the knock list?
What I want to say is I want to give the most Coen's answer ever and say maybe, but I'm not going to do that. For like just frustrate you with the answer.
Do we just give it 3 maybes?
Yeah, we all just shrug.
I'm going to say talking about the film has made me. I enjoyed it. Talking about the film has made me appreciate it more than after just having watched it. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to say it is not going from. I'm voting no for the knock list.
Okay, that's one no. It's all still to play for. Cam, where do you stand?
I am so like struggling with myself on this one because
It's a maybe.
I feel like the Coens almost demand that everyone just give maybes, and like that's how they're satisfied. They walk away going, "Perfect, we did what we set out to do." People are conflicted about this movie and still, chewing it over. I love the idea of having a Coen Brothers movie on the knock list because this would be the only one. They haven't done any other spy movies. And I think it's doing like interesting things with spy tropes that I've never seen done anywhere else. Like a lot of the spy movies we do that are comedies tend to come at it from a pretty head-on way. Like they're just kind of spoofing the conventions everyone knows. And I think this movie is trying to do some interesting things and commenting on the CIA in a way that I haven't really seen done before, especially in this way. So I'm going to go, I think, with a light yes. I actually think this would be a really interesting one.
Wow, this is one of those rare occurrences where I actually get a say when it comes to three people, because usually I am voted out by this point.
That's why I cited the Roger Ebert comparison earlier. I'm not comparing myself to Ebert in any way in terms of quality, but
it sounded like you were there. It did sound like you were, Cam.
I sound like an egomaniac. I sounded like I belonged in this movie. But it's more the sense, like, I just remember his mediocre reviews of, like, The Shining, and then later on putting it in his all-time greatest films of all time and saying, like, I didn't get it. And doing the same thing, Godfather 2. I think maybe Silence of the Lambs, maybe, as well. Like, there's been movies along the way that he was, willing to say, hey, I just didn't get this movie at the time. And I kind of feel that way about this one now. And I don't know that I've run into that on anything else we've done on this podcast. And very few movies, sometimes you'll shift in percentage of enjoyment. Like, I enjoyed it before, liked it more this time. But I haven't really had one where I've really flipped on it the way I have this movie.
No, and it's been interesting to watch your sort of a appreciation growing of the film, and Matt's too, actually, to be fair. I think, just to set it out, there's a yes and a no now, so I do get the vote, which is nice. The power is in my hands. I think this film challenges the viewer, and I think if we go back to the core mission statement of the show, which is to find the best spy films ever made, I have to ask myself that question. Is this one of the best spy films ever made? Probably not.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah.
And that's the problem I'm facing. But then I also look at and Cam, I think you mentioned these films on purpose, which is In Like Flint and Spy Kids, because we kind of put them on the list as like outliers that inform your viewing. And I wonder to myself, does Burn After Reading go in that kind of that wing almost? Like, does it take up that mantle?
There is the argument, though. You can look at both Spy Kids and Our Man Flint as somewhat trendsetters, whereas you could very much ask the question, did Burn After Reading have any real influence?
The tension's killing me here. My God.
Yeah, Scott stares into space.
I'm sure this will all be cut down in the edit, and I am just sitting here pondering what I do with this film, because personally, I think I got a lot from it. I laugh when I watch this film, and I've watched this film 3 times now, and I have laughed at the same jokes every time. That proves to me that it's a successful film. Is it a successful spy film? And that's where I'm crippled with anxiety, much like George Clooney is in this film. No. I can't justify it as making the list of the best spy films ever made. If this was going to be a list of, like, if we ever expanded it and had a second level, like a second tier, maybe, like something that, but I think Cam probably sealed this film's death certificate when he said a moment ago, has this left an indelible mark on spy cinema? No. It just poked fun at it really well. And I don't think that means it is must-see.
Right.
So, there you go. 2 no's, 1 yes. Burn After Reading is not making the knock list. The trials and tribulations this film went through just to see if it could get there, but it could not. Well, thank you for listening, folks. Matt, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. It's been loads of fun.
Now, before you go, obviously we spoke about the books you've got out at the moment at the beginning of the show, but where can people find more of your work? Is there a website we can point people to?
Well, you could go to mattglasby.com, or you could see me at Matt Glasby on Twitter, or at the Book of Horror if that particularly floats your boat. But yeah, if you just look up my name, you'll find me, because there's not too many of those kicking around.
Absolutely. And we'll put links in the show notes below to all the books. People can just click below if they want to read more about that. And we'll be tagging you on social media as well so they can find you that way. So again, Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much.
Well, Cam, it looks like we have burned after reading. But what are we talking about next week?
We are tackling our first ever anime film. From Burn After Reading and the Coen brothers to an anime film, and one that has a lot of name value, I think, out there. It's going to be 1995's Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah, this is quite a special film to me. This was at my request. It has got a spy element to it, so that's why I've included it. I was a big fan of this one when I was young. I'll save the story for next week. But yeah, I'm very excited to go back and revisit with you. And we've got an expert on the genre coming in to help contextualize it. So it should be a very interesting episode.
I'm looking forward to this one. It's definitely outside of sort of my comfort zone. I've seen some anime films, not a ton though, by any stretch. So I'm looking forward to digging into something I'm not particularly familiar with.
Yeah, it'll be the first time that you're an idiot like me.
That's right. That's right.
Well, there you go, folks. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to check out Ghost in the Shell from 1995 and join us next week. We have recently started up the Spy Podcast Network, and you can find out more about that at spypodcasts.com. Check out a whole range of really cool spy podcasts. And don't forget to follow us discreetly on social media at SpyHards. That's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, listeners, remember, forewarned is forearmed.
Exploring the works of John le Carré, each episode of the Le Carré cast looks at a specific novel or an unexplored aspect of his life and work. Join us as we take a deep dive into the world of espionage John le Carré has revealed. Search for Le Carré Cast wherever you listen to podcasts or at lecarrecast.com.